My name's ArtJohn and I'm an artist.
And this is my art studio, which is in a brilliant building called the Art House, which is in the centre of Wakefield.
Now, my art studio is a place where I come to play with ideas and to experiment with new ways of making things, without the fear of making mistakes or even worrying if the thing will work in the first place.
And you know, that's a really important attitude for artists to have, because that open-minded thinking and that willingness to give things a go is what helps artists create artwork which is interesting and exciting and unusual.
Now, I like making all kinds of art, but my favourite type of art to make is sculpture.
And one of my biggest inspirations is the artist Barbara Hepworth.
She was born on the 10th of January 1903, but you'll never guess where.
Well, wonderful Wakefield, of course. This is where she spent the first part of her life growing up here, before later moving to St Ives in Cornwall, where she lived and worked until she died in 1975. And in those 72 years, she made loads of incredible sculptures that you can find all around the world. And luckily, many of them are in Wakefield, at both the Yorkshire Sculpture Park and the gallery that's named after her, the Hepworth Wakefield. Her sculptures have distinctive shapes, but how can we create our own shapes, not copied from her, but inspired by her? Well, we can do this using 2 pens or pencils and a little story from Hepworth's childhood. You see, when Barbara Hepworth was born, cars were a new invention and incredibly rare, but her dad had access to one, and they would go on long journeys across the West Yorkshire countryside. It was those undulating hills and those winding, bendy roads that would play a great influence on her sculpture. So let's imagine that these pens are cars driving across the page like it's a winding road. Make sure to overlap the lines and keep it simple. Then choose the shapes you find most interesting. You might need to turn your paper to find them. You can then draw these shapes in your sketchbook. Then, to really add that Hepworth magic, add some round shapes inside your drawings. Barbara Hepworth used holes a lot in her sculptures. They act almost like windows, helping to frame the world around them. And we can use these shapes to help inspire our own sculptures, starting with a classic sculpture material, air drying clay. Clay is great because it is easy to make shapes quickly. We can use our palm to flatten it, or use a rolling pin, or in this case, a cardboard tube. We call this rolled out clay a slab. If you don't have clay tools, you can use a ruler to cut out your shapes. And then you can try to make your shape stand up on another clay slab. Remember to use your fingers to blend the 2 pieces together so that they become one bit of clay. You can join several shapes together. This will make your sculpture stronger. You can also try to create a more 3D version of your shape by squeezing and moulding the clay within your hands. Let your clay take on its own shape and form. It will naturally guide you. You can smooth the clay with your finger or use different materials to add texture to the clay. Textures were important to Hepworth. What other textures could you use? Another way to use clay is to take inspiration from Hepworth's series of sculptures called Family of Man. In these sculptures, she stacks shapes on top of each other, creating abstract sculptures that may remind you of the human body. Take your clay and chop it up into 4 or 5 smaller pieces. Then for each piece, create a different shape. You can use your fingers and your palm to help shape the clay. Think about adding holes or concave surfaces and add details to those shapes. Then you can experiment with stacking your clay shapes in different positions, thinking about balance. You can even try the score and slip technique to stick them together. Score means to scratch the surface of the clay, and slip is when you mix water and clay together, a bit like glue. If you add slip to the scored clay, it will create a strong bond. Maybe you can display them all together somewhere in your school and think about who these abstract sculptures may represent. Now, once dry, the clay can sometimes become pretty fragile, but you can add strength to it by painting it with varnish or a little bit of PVA glue.
Right, enjoy making your sculptures, and remember that clay is a malleable material, which means it will often produce unexpected results, and artists embrace that.